The light within the grand orrery of the concordance was the color of a dying star. It pulsed in time with the slow, resonant hum of the chamber's atmospheric regulators, casting long, skeletal shadows from the dais platforms that floated in the vast, spherical space. Each platform held a representative of one of the galaxy's elder species, their forms illuminated by the swirling holographic projection of the Milky Way that served as the chamber's heart. But today, the hologram was marred. A creeping, amorphous stain of absolute black was consuming a sector of the Perseus arm. It was not merely an absence of light, but an absence of everything: data, energy, life, causality. The Cathar called it the Shroud of Unbeing, the Viking the Void Maw. The Terrans, in their quaint terrestrial tongue, had named its theoretical possibility the Veil of Silence. High Prelate Vorlag of the Cathar, his crystalline exoskeleton refracting the dim light into 1,000 fractured sorrows, felt the chamber's collective despair as a physical pressure against his carapace. For cycles, they had watched the veil expand. It did not conquer, it erased. Star systems, teeming with life and history, would simply cease to be. No debris, no radiation, no final, defiant cry, only a perfect, horrifying null. The concordance, a union of species whose combined history spanned 100 millennia, was powerless. Their fleets, magnificent armadas that could crack continents and extinguish suns, were useless. To send a ship into the veil was to unwrite it from existence. They had tried. The memory of those crews and the very record of their ships had vanished as if they had never been forged. "It has consumed the Trinarch systems," a voice, sharp and grating as grinding steel, echoed through the orrery. Warlord Grak of the Vikings stood rigid on his platform, his metallic sinews tense beneath a cloak of spun alloy. His people were warriors, forged in the crucible of a high-gravity world, and their philosophy was brutally simple. Any problem could be solved with sufficient application of force. "Our picket fleets report a complete cessation of all quantum entanglement signals. The Trinarchs are gone, their worlds, their people, their legacy erased." A murmur of dread rippled through the assembled delegates. The Trinarchs had been a species of living mathematics, their consciousness woven into the very fabric of their planetary system's orbital harmonics. They were thought to be eternal. Now they were nothing. "The strategy of containment has failed," Grak continued, his voice a hammer blow against the chamber's oppressive silence. "The quantum barrier pylons have been nullified, the mass shadow projectors ineffective. We have thrown our greatest technologies at this phenomenon, and it has not even registered our efforts. We are attempting to build a dam against the tide of entropy itself." Vorlag inclined his head, the gesture slow and deliberate. "Your assessment is grim, warlord, but accurate. Our methods, our very understanding of physics, seem to be insufficient." "Insufficient?" Grak scoffed, his quad-lensed eyes flashing with contempt. "They are irrelevant. We are watching the end of all things, and we are debating semantics. We must act. A unified assault. Every ship, every weapon from every member world. We will concentrate our firepower on the leading edge of the veil. We will tear a hole in reality itself if we must, but we will burn this cancer out of our galaxy." The idea was madness born of desperation. They had attempted a similar, smaller-scale assault before. The fleet, a glorious assembly of the Concordance's finest warships, had fired into the blackness. Their beams of coherent antimatter, their lances of focused gravitational energy, had simply vanished, contributing nothing but their own existence to the encroaching void. Grak's proposal was to do the same thing, but on a scale that would beggar their entire civilization. "And what would that accomplish, Warlord?" A new voice intervened, soft and melodic. It was Lyrasil, the Signian empath, a being of pure thought given form by a shimmering, vaguely humanoid energy field. "You would throw our fleets into the abyss and leave our worlds defenseless. You mistake rage for strategy. The veil does not respond to force. It does not have a consciousness to intimidate, nor a structure to destroy. It is a state of non-existence. How do you wage war on nothing?" The chamber fell silent again, the weight of her questions settling upon them all. This was the core of their terror. They were a council of giants, of galactic titans who had moved stars and built worlds, and they were being defeated by an enemy they could not even define. It was then that Vorlag, feeling the cold certainty of his own political annihilation, decided to speak the thought that had been coalescing in his mind for weeks, a thought so heretical it felt like blasphemy. He activated the primary address system, his platform drifting slowly toward the center of the orrery, into the baleful light of the dying hologram. "There is another option," he said, his voice a low thrum of resonating crystal. The attention of every delegate snapped to him. "One we have long dismissed, a species we have observed but never truly understood, a people whose very nature is a paradox of creation and destruction. Grak's metallic jawplates tightened. Speak plainly, prelate, do not waste our time with riddles. I speak of the Terrans, Vorlag stated, letting the name hang in the air. A wave of disbelief and derision washed over the chamber. The Terrans, humanity, the violent, chaotic, short-lived primates from the Sol system. They were a fledgling species, barely spacefaring by concordance standards. They had been granted observational status a mere century ago, a token gesture of inclusiveness. Their technology was considered brutish and unsophisticated, their culture a baffling whirlwind of savage conflict and sublime art. The humans, Grak's laughter was a discordant clang. The ephemeral apes who spent millennia killing each other over scraps of land and imagined deities. You would ask them for help. What could they possibly offer? Sharpened sticks. Their ships are powered by crude fission reactions and chemical propellants. They are children playing with firecrackers in a gallery of stellar fusion. They are more than that, Vorlag insisted, his calm unwavering. We have judged them by their technology, which is indeed primitive compared to our own. We have judged them by their history, which is undeniably drenched in blood. But we have failed to comprehend the result of that history. Every other species in this chamber evolved on worlds of relative stability. We achieved planetary unity through millennia of slow, measured progress. The humans. They unified their world under the constant threat of self-annihilation. Their peace is not the peace of tranquility, but the peace of a predator that has finally exhausted its rivals. He gestured to the holographic archives, and a new set of images flared to life beside the ominous black stain of the veil. There were Terran images, a mushroom cloud blooming over a desolate landscape, soldiers in crude armor clashing with swords, cities reduced to rubble. But then other images appeared, seamlessly blending with the first. A single musician playing a cello in a bombed-out square. A sculpture of impossible grace, carved from the wreckage of a war machine. A scientist weeping with joy as a probe landed on a distant moon. A philosopher's text, translated into the Concordance's universal script, filled the space with words of profound hope and existential courage. They are a paradox, Vorlag continued, his voice resonating with a strange, unnerving reverence. They destroy with one hand and create with the other. Their violence is an engine for their ingenuity. Their despair is the catalyst for their greatest art. They have faced extinction countless times, often by their own hand, and each time they have not only survived, but emerged stronger, more cunning, more resilient. They do not fear the abyss, Warlord Grak. They were born in it. They have looked into the void of their own making, and found a reason to build. Philosophy and sentiment, Grak snarled. It will not stop the veil. Perhaps not, Vorlag conceded. But their approach to existential threats is unlike our own. We seek to impose order on the universe. The Terrans, they seem to embrace chaos. They surf the tsunami while we try to build walls against it. Their military doctrines are not based on overwhelming force, but on asymmetry, on adaptation, on finding the one illogical, unpredictable solution that can unravel a perfectly logical problem. And the veil of silence is a perfectly logical problem. It is the ultimate, inexorable conclusion of entropy. A long, heavy silence descended. The delegates looked at the images of humanity, at the fire and the art, the war and the science, and for the first time they felt a flicker of something other than contempt. It was a cold, unnerving sense of uncertainty. These creatures were not like them. They were volatile, unpredictable. To invite them into this crisis was to invite a variable into an equation that was already unsolvable. "And what is your proposal, prelate?" Lyrasil's ethereal voice cut through the tension. "That we simply ask for their help, and what if they refuse, or worse, what if their chaotic methods exacerbate the crisis?" "We will not ask for their help," Vorlag corrected gently. "We will present them with the data, we will show them the end of all things, and we will see what they do. I have studied their archives. When faced with a common enemy, a threat to all existence, they have a singular, recurring response. They unite, they innovate, and they fight with a savagery and ingenuity that defies all reason. They are the galaxy's final, desperate, illogical gambit." The debate raged for hours, but Vorlag's words had planted a seed of doubt in the Concordance's certainty. Their own ways had failed. Their pride was costing them the galaxy. With a heavy heart and against the furious protests of the Viking and their allies, the Concordance voted. The motion passed by the slimmest of margins, carried only by Vorlag's own tie-breaking authority as High Prelate. A single, tightly coded information packet was dispatched from the Grand Orrery. It contained everything: Their sensor readings of the veil, their failed strategies, their casualty reports, their desperation. It was a message in a bottle, cast into the small, noisy corner of the galaxy occupied by the Terran Federation. It was a plea for a miracle from a species they had barely considered sentient. As the transmission confirmation signal glowed on the main console, a profound quiet fell over the chamber. The great and powerful species of the galactic concordance, the architects of civilizations that spanned eons, could do nothing more than wait. They had appealed to the primitives, the barbarians at the gate. And in the silence, surrounded by the ghosts of dying stars, Vorlag felt a terror deeper than any the veil had inspired. He had either doomed them all with his foolish hope, or he had just invited a force more unpredictable than the void itself to their doorstep. The Terran response came sooner than any of them had anticipated. Not weeks, not days, but mere hours after their message had been received. It was not a message of political maneuvering, nor a request for concessions or treaties. It was a single, simple, and utterly chilling transmission. It contained only a set of coordinates for a rendezvous point on the edge of the affected sector, a temporal marker for their arrival, and 2 words in their own guttural, yet strangely resonant language. "We are coming." The designated rendezvous point was a dead zone of space, a bleak expanse where the last star of a dying cluster had long since guttered out. It was here, in the oppressive dark, that a concordance flotilla waited. It was a token force, but even a token force from the concordance was a spectacle of power. Cathar crystalline cruisers hung in the void like frozen lightning, their fractal hulls shimmering with contained energy. Sleek Viking destroyers, all sharp angles and weapon emplacements, patrolled the perimeter with aggressive intent. At the center of the formation was the Stellarch's Will, Vorlag's own command vessel, its observation dome offering a panoramic view of the silent emptiness. Warlord Grak stood beside Vorlag on the bridge, his posture radiating impatience. "They are late," he grumbled, though the temporal marker was still minutes away. "Typical of their chaotic nature, no discipline." Vorlag did not respond. His multifaceted eyes were fixed on the void, his mind a whirlwind of apprehension. He had gambled the fate of the galaxy on a species he had only ever observed through the detached lens of an archive. He had seen their potential, but he had also seen their boundless capacity for destruction. "Ambassador Rostova is on the comms channel, High Prelate," an aide announced. "She wishes to open a visual link." "On screen," Vorlag commanded. The main view screen flickered, resolving into the image of a human female. She was older, her face lined with the marks of time, her gray hair pulled back in a severe, functional style. Her eyes, however, were sharp and intelligent, holding a depth of weary calm that Vorlag found deeply unsettling. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform devoid of any rank or adornment. This was Ambassador Eva Rostova, the designated envoy of the Terran Federation. "High Prelate Vorlag," she began, her voice even and measured, without any trace of the awe or fear a representative of a lesser species should exhibit in the presence of the concordance. "Warlord Grak, I trust your journey was uneventful." "Your punctuality is lacking, Ambassador," Grak retorted. Rostova's expression did not change. "On the contrary, Warlord, our vessel will arrive at the precise moment stipulated. We Terrans have learned the value of time. We have so little of it, you see." There was no irony in her voice, only a quiet statement of fact that seemed to carry the weight of her entire species' brief, violent history. "And this vessel of yours?" Vorlag asked, his curiosity overriding his unease. "We detect no energy signature, no gravitational displacement. Are you using some form of stealth technology unknown to us?" "Not stealth, High Prelate," Rostova replied. "Efficiency." And then it happened. Not with a flash of light or a rupture in space-time, but with a sudden, jarring presence. One moment there was empty space. The next, a ship was there. It had not arrived, it was simply there. The Concordance fleet's sensors screamed, trying to make sense of the impossible readings. It was as if the ship had unfolded itself from a dimension they could not perceive. The vessel was not large. It was smaller than a Viking destroyer, a mere speck against the backdrop of the Concordance cruisers. Its design was alien to their sensibilities. It was asymmetrical, a chaotic lattice of interlocking plates, glowing conduits, and strange, whirling gyroscopic rings. It looked less like a ship and more like a piece of abstract, brutalist sculpture. There were no visible weapon ports, no defensive shielding emitters, no drive signatures they could recognize. "What is this thing?" Grak breathed, his arrogance momentarily replaced by genuine confusion. It has no weapons, no armor to speak of. Did you come here to be annihilated? That is not a warship, warlord, Rostova said calmly. That is the TCS Tempest. It is a containment vessel, a tool. A tool for what? Vorlag pressed, his mind racing. For managing storms, the ambassador answered, her gaze unwavering. Your people call it the Veil of Silence. We have a simpler, more terrestrial name for such a phenomenon, a hurricane, an overwhelming, chaotic force of nature that cannot be fought, only weathered or redirected. You have been trying to build a wall against the storm surge. We have learned it is better to become the eye of the storm. Before anyone could process the meaning of her cryptic words, the tempest began to move. It drifted slowly toward the edge of the veil, a tangible boundary of nothingness that hung in the void like a tear in the fabric of the cosmos. The Concordance ships maintained a respectful distance, their captains and crews watching in rapt silence. "What are they doing?" Grack demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. "Their energy readings are nonsensical. They are fluctuating across every spectrum from thermal to chronoton emissions. It's a cascade of pure noise." "They are not preparing to fire a weapon," Vorlag whispered, his crystalline mind finally grasping a sliver of the terrifying truth. He was remembering the paradox of human art and violence. They did not think in straight lines. "They are preparing to compose." On the view screen, Ambassador Rostova simply nodded, as if confirming his unspoken realization. The veil operates on a principle of absolute simplicity. It is an entropic cascade, reducing all complexity, all information to a state of perfect, uniform null. It is the universe's final, silent, logical answer. To fight it with logic is to feed it. To fight it with force is to be consumed by it. We, however, have never been a particularly logical species. The TCS Tempest reached the edge of the veil, and then it began to change. The interlocking plates of its hull shifted and slid apart. The glowing conduits flared with impossible colors. The gyroscopic rings began to spin at incredible speeds, warping the space around them. The ship was not powering up a weapon. It was unfurling, transforming itself into a colossal, intricate instrument. "By the first stars," Grack stammered, "what is that energy field?" A wave of something that was not energy, not radiation, and not matter began to emanate from the tempest. It was a field of pure, weaponized complexity. The concordance sensors, designed to measure coherent and predictable phenomena, were overwhelmed with data that was fundamentally irrational. They registered impossible geometries, temporal paradoxes on a quantum level, and mathematical constants that were actively rewriting themselves. The Terran ship was projecting a localized field of chaos. It was creating a storm of its own, a hurricane of such intricate, multifaceted, and contradictory information that it was, in essence, the conceptual opposite of the veil. It was not a negation of the void, but an oversaturation of it. The veil of silence, which had consumed fleets and stars without effort, began to react. The perfect, sharp edge of the nothingness started to fray. It was like watching a sheet of black ice crack and splinter under an unbearable weight. The veil, a phenomenon of absolute simplicity, could not process the infinite complexity being forced into its boundary. The null state was being flooded with so much something, so much art and math and music and madness, that it was beginning to break down. "They are not destroying it," Lyrasil's voice whispered over the command channel, filled with a profound, soul-shaking awe. "They are teaching it to exist." The space where the tempest met the veil became a maelstrom of cosmic insanity. New laws of physics seemed to bloom and die in microseconds. Colors that had no name flickered into being. The silent void was filled with a cacophony of phantom sounds, echoes of possibilities and paradoxes playing out on a cosmic scale. The Terran ship, the Tempest, sat at the calm center of this hurricane of its own creation, serenely broadcasting a symphony of pure, unadulterated reality. From the bridge of the Stellark's will, Vorlag watched as the veil of silence, the inexorable end of all things, began to recede. It was not a retreat, it was a transmutation. The edge of the void was solidifying, crystallizing into strange, new forms of matter and energy. The erased star systems were not returning, but the emptiness they had left behind was being filled with potential. The Terrans were not restoring what was lost, they were terraforming the void itself. The process took hours. The small, unassuming Terran ship held its position, a beacon of defiant complexity against the ultimate simplicity of non-existence. It never fired a shot. It never launched a missile. Its only weapon was the sheer, stubborn, chaotic force of existence itself, weaponized and directed by a species that had been born from chaos and had learned to master it. Finally, the field from the tempest subsided. The gyroscopic rings slowed, the conduits dimmed, and the ship began to fold back into its more conventional, if still bizarre, configuration. Where the veil of silence had been, there was now a vast, shimmering nebula of iridescent dust and nascent energy fields. It was a scar, but it was a scar teeming with new life, a testament to the battle that had been fought and won. Silence reigned on the bridge of the Concordance flagship. Warlord Grack stood as if carved from stone, his metallic face a mask of disbelief. The other delegates on the comms network were equally stunned. Their entire understanding of warfare, of technology, of the very nature of the universe, had been irrevocably shattered. They had brought their swords and spears to a battle of ideas, and the humans, the primitives, had arrived with a symphony. The viewscreen switched back to Ambassador Rostova. Her expression was unchanged. There was no triumph in her eyes, no arrogance in her posture. There was only the same weary calm. "The immediate threat has been contained, High Prelate," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "The entropic cascade has been stabilized. The system is recalibrating." Vorlag found his voice after a long moment. It was hoarse, strained. "Ambassador, what was that? What is that ship? We have never conceived of such a technology." "The Tempest is what we call a Hurricane-class battleship," she explained, and for the first time Vorlag understood the terrible, beautiful accuracy of the name. It wasn't a ship designed to fight battles. It was designed to be a battle, a force of nature unto itself. It is not a weapon, not in the sense you understand. It is a reality-shaping engine. We developed the technology not for war, but for survival. Our homeworld, Earth, was dying. We had poisoned our atmosphere, destabilized our climate. We were facing our own self-inflicted veil of silence. We could not fight the storm, so we learned to redirect it. We learned to manipulate the fundamental principles of causality and information to mend what we had broken. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The Hurricane class was designed to terraform our dead world back to life. It was a tool of creation born from our near-total self-destruction. This is the first time we have ever used it to unmake something. The implications of her statement were staggering. Humanity had not developed this technology for conquest or for war against others. They had developed it to save themselves from themselves. Their greatest weapon was a tool of healing, repurposed. The sheer ethical and philosophical depth of that concept was more overwhelming to Vorlag than the display of power he had just witnessed. You hold the power to rewrite reality," Grack said, his voice a low, humbled rumble. "And you have kept this hidden from the galaxy." "Power is a burden, Warlord," Rostova replied, her gaze softening slightly. "Not a prize. We understand its cost better than most. We have no desire to impose our will on the cosmos. We only wish to ensure that there is a cosmos left to exist in. The veil threatened all of us. Cathar, Viking, Terran, in the face of such a threat, our differences are meaningless." The grand orrery was convened again, but the atmosphere was profoundly different. The fear and arrogance were gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling sense of humility. The holographic display no longer showed a creeping black stain, but the newly formed, vibrant nebula where the veil had once been. The delegates of the Concordance looked at the human ambassador, now projected into the center of the chamber with new eyes. They saw not a primitive, but a being of immense, terrifying wisdom, forged in a fire they could not comprehend. Warlord Grack was the first to speak. He stepped forward on his platform, his customary aggression replaced by a solemn dignity. He performed a formal Viking salute, a gesture of absolute respect reserved for a conquering superior. "Ambassador Rostova," he began, his voice clear and strong. "On behalf of the Viking Imperium, and if I may be so bold, the entire galactic concordance, we were wrong. We judged your people by the standards of our own history, our own understanding of power. We saw chaos and saw only weakness. We failed to see the strength within it. Your people have saved us. Your Hurricane-class battleship has unleashed a new age for this galaxy. The debt we owe you is immeasurable." Other leaders echoed his sentiment. A new era of cooperation was dawning, an alliance forged not in conquest, but in shared salvation. Humanity, the quiet, unpredictable newcomer, was being offered a seat at the highest council, not as a junior member, but as an equal, perhaps even a first among equals. Vorlag felt a sense of profound relief, but it was tinged with an underlying tremor of unease. The power the Terrans wielded was absolute. It was a creator's power. But as he had learned from their own history, the line between creation and destruction was terrifyingly thin. "We accept your offer of alliance," Ambassador Rostova said, her voice carrying a new warmth. We have much to learn from you, from your stability, your long history, your wisdom, and we perhaps have things to teach. The universe is more complex and more wondrous than any of us have imagined. As she spoke, a priority alert chimed through the orrery. A direct data feed from the TCS Tempest, still on station at the edge of the new nebula. A technician on Vorlag's platform leaned forward, his crystalline fingers flying across a console. "High Prelate," the technician said, his voice tight with confusion. "The Tempest is reporting an anomaly from deep within the stabilized zone. Their reality engines have rendered the space safe for deep-range sensor probes. They are detecting something at the heart of where the veil was strongest." "The source of the veil?" Grak asked, his warrior instincts flaring. "No," Rostova said, her calm expression finally breaking, replaced by a look of intense, focused curiosity. "Something else, something the veil was containing." On the main screen, a new set of data began to scroll. It was not sensor readings of energy or matter. It was a signal, a complex, structured, and undeniably artificial signal. It was impossibly ancient, predating the rise of the Cathar, predating the birth of the Viking homeworld star. It was a message, coded in a form of mathematics so advanced it was closer to a universal law than a language. The Terran ship's powerful computers, aided by the combined processing power of the Concordance network, began to translate. The chamber held a collective, silent breath as the message was slowly, painstakingly decoded. The words, when they finally appeared on the screen in the Concordance's script, were stark and chilling. "Static warning, do not breach the quarantine." A wave of cold dread washed over Vorlag, colder than the void of the veil itself. "The filter is broken. The silence was OUR shield. IT was not a weapon. IT was a cage." The message continued, a desperate eons-old warning from a civilization long since turned to dust. They spoke of an entity, a consciousness from outside the known dimensions of the universe, a being of such vast and malevolent intellect that its very thought could poison reality. They called it the Weaver of Dissonance. The veil of silence had not been an enemy advancing upon the galaxy. It had been a barrier, a cosmic prison wall erected by some ancient, forgotten power to protect them. A perfect, silent, entropic field designed to keep something out. And humanity, with their terrible, beautiful, chaotic power, had just torn it down. The final line of the translated message appeared, and the grand orrery fell into a silence more profound and more terrifying than any they had ever known. "They hear you now, they see the light. The galaxy no longer quakes before a battleship, it quakes before the thing you have unleashed." On the view screen, Ambassador Rostova's face was pale, her weary calm finally shattered, replaced by the grim, familiar resolve of a species that had looked into the abyss one too many times. Vorlag looked at her, and then at the faces of the other delegates. The arrogance, the fear, the relief, it had all been stripped away, leaving only a single unifying emotion. They had mistaken the prison wall for the prisoner. They had celebrated their victory over the lock, only to realize they had just opened the door to the monster lurking in the dark. A new alliance was born, not in the light of a shared victory, but in the shadow of a dawning, unimaginable horror. And humanity, the saviors of the galaxy, were now the architects of its greatest, and perhaps final, existential threat. The real storm was just beginning.